Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all age. It's that time again. Hardy on History. Welcome to my library. I'm Michael C. Hardy. This is where I hang out the most. Sharing history, researching, coming up with crazy ideas. Hope everybody is doing well out there. Drop me a note. Let me know where you're watching from this evening. Doesn't mean absolutely anything, but I would be curious to know what's going on and where you are at this evening. Um, been an exciting week. Most weeks are exciting weeks. Had three speaking engagements. This past week was in Statesville at the Public Library, Statesville, North Carolina. This past Monday night, had an awesome time out sharing history. Great crowd, great questions. I was in High Point, or I was in Chapel Hill on Thursday night. Good crowd, smaller crowd, well, good questions. And I was at the Carson House in Old Fort, North Carolina, yesterday for most of the day for their annual North Carolina UDC convention, not convention, symposium. And I actually spoke once and I filled in a second time. And had a great time. Great to see friends there, folks I've not seen in a while. This upcoming week, today is August 2nd, 2026. On Tuesday night, I will be in Yadkinville, North Carolina, speaking to their SCV camp. And on Saturday, I will be at Crockett Days at Tusculum University at the Doak Museum, Samuel Doak Museum. So if you're in North Carolina, Upper Piedmont area, North Carolina, let me know if you want to come on out to Yadkinville. And if you are in East Tennessee, come on out to the Doak Museum and we will chat history. We'll be talking about the new book. Be set up all day. I think Mrs. Elizabeth is going with me that day. Yeah, really looking forward to that. I want to say good evening to our friends who have signed in this evening. Robert from Arizona, Al from Tennessee, MJ from Pennsylvania, and Robert. And I can't talk this evening for some reason. I don't know why. So when I signed up to speak at this symposium yesterday, they wanted something on like Western North Carolina, Appalachia, and war. And I struggled for 2 or 3 weeks to come up with something. But I finally hit upon this idea to do this thing about William Holland Thomas and John B. Palmer. It's actually called Thomas v. Palmer because they were both in Western North Carolina during the American Civil War, and they clashed a lot. And so that's probably something I'm going to work into an article that I may send off to something like Civil War News or something to get published. But I have another great thing to share with you this evening along those same lines. This is a little different. And I was doing a lot of reading the past few days on William Holland Thomas. And I didn't realize, or if I knew this, I totally forgot about it. But he was court-martialed 3 different times. And I thought I would share a little bit with you this evening. And there's going to be a blog post. I'll probably have it up probably tomorrow over at Looking for the Confederate War. So make sure you check that out. Of course, many people have heard of Thomas's Legion. It's kind of one of those, I don't want to say mythical because it really existed, but I don't know. What's a good word? Story. Elizabeth just said story. Accounts of the American Civil War. Well, Elizabeth just compared it to the Irish Brigade, and I don't know if that's
like that they have a reputation.
But yeah, they do have a reputation. William Holland Thomas was born here in Western North Carolina in 1805. He was raised by his widow mother. He was managing a store by the time he was 13. He dealt in real estate. By 1848, he's serving in the state Senate. He was a Democrat from the Whiggish Mountains of Western North Carolina, which is unusual. Usually, Western North Carolina would vote for Whigs over Democrats. But Thomas really has a long and complex history with the Cherokee. He ran a store in Quallatown in Haywood County, North Carolina. He was adopted by the Cherokee chief, Yonaguska, which is, I assume, how you say that. And some of the Cherokee, everybody's kind of familiar with the Cherokee removal. Well, and that's the 1830s. In 1819, the Cherokee had some of the Cherokee. They become known as the Lufty Cherokee. They had actually worked out a land deal where they are able to purchase or get land grants for property, and so when the Cherokee removals take place, the Lufty Cherokee still have their land, and they will kind of hire William Holland Thomas to represent them in Washington, D.C. for their land claims. When Yonaguska died, William Holland Thomas was elected their chief. I think that's the only time in history that has ever happened. When we get to the time of the war, William Holland Thomas is in favor of secession. He actually writes a letter to the Raleigh State Journal in February of 1861, where he says, quote, "The cause of the South is our cause, the safety of the South is our safety, and the destiny of the South is our destiny." And Thomas was elected to the secession convention that met in Raleigh in 1861. Thomas had this idea of raising a company of Cherokee for Confederate service. And his first attempt is called the Junaluska Zouaves, but it doesn't really go anyplace because Thomas is not there. He's in Raleigh. Thomas will write Jefferson Davis, which is a huge part of Thomas's problem. Davis and Thomas might have known each other, but I wouldn't consider them friends like some other folks that Davis knows. But Thomas will write Davis and get permission to raise a battalion of Cherokee. And that same idea Thomas has got as legislation before the General Assembly of North Carolina. Well, the state Senate votes for it. The state House does not vote for it. And so the state does not agree to raise a company or a battalion of Cherokee. In November of 1861, we have a very famous episode in history called the Bridge Burnings. A group of Unionists in East Tennessee decide that they're going to burn the railroad bridges there. And when they do this, the area will be isolated, and a group of federal soldiers from Kentucky will swoop in and save East Tennessee from the Confederates. Even though there are a lot of Confederates, most other people, pro-Confederate people in Eastern Tennessee, this was the idea. The Unionists get together and they burn some of the bridges, but the federal soldiers from Kentucky do not ever come. And some of the Unionists are captured and sent off to prison in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. A few of them are captured and executed on the bridges they tried to burn. Some of them, the Unionists escape over the mountains into Western North Carolina. So Governor Henry Clark decides to raise these ranger companies in Western North Carolina to patrol the border. John B. Palmer raises one of those companies. It's called the Mitchell Rangers, which will eventually become Company A of the 58th North Carolina. Thomas is chosen to raise one of those companies. Palmer's company is actually raised in December or mustered into service in December of 1862. Thomas's company will not really be mustered into service until April of 1862. They're called the Highland Rangers. And I've kind of compressed the history of Thomas's Legion a lot into like almost this one paragraph. Thomas's small command, and he has a small number of native peoples, Cherokee, and he has a larger number of white soldiers. They are sent to East Tennessee to guard bridges in June, July, August, September, on through 1862 and early 1863. Thomas continues to recruit, and eventually he has a couple of different battalions. He's got the infantry regiment under Lieutenant Colonel James R. Love. He's got Walker's battalion under Lieutenant Colonel William C. Walker. He's got Levi's battery under Captain John T. Levi. And there is the Native American battalion. The vast majority of men who served in what becomes known as Thomas's Legion are not native peoples. They are white soldiers from Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. But there is a group of Cherokee, several companies out of all of this that are from Quallatown, Jackson County, Haywood County, Cherokee County, maybe Graham County here in Western North Carolina. So it's while Thomas is in East Tennessee that he really starts to run into trouble. A lot of the companies that Thomas has raised have high desertion rates. We're talking 20, 30 men at time a month. Some of these men will come back, but it's a very fluid situation. And to try and give order to Thomas's Legion, they are placed under the command of Brigadier General Alfred E. Jackson. Jackson and Thomas clash. Thomas, and this is Thomas's problem all along. Thomas thinks that he reports to Jefferson Davis and God. And when Thomas himself is placed under other commanders, well, it leads to all kinds of problems. They clash. On August 15th, 1863, Thomas is arrested for the first time. He is arrested. He was placed under arrest by Jackson for disobedience of orders. Thomas was sent to Knoxville for trial. We don't know if the trial was, this is August 63. We don't know if the trial was interrupted by the advance of federal soldiers in September of 63. Ambrose Burnside, Confederates have abandoned East Tennessee, and Ambrose Burnside is moving with federal soldiers into the area. We don't know if the trial was postponed. We don't know if the charges were dismissed. There's just not enough records to tell us that. In September, as I just mentioned, of 1863, most of East Tennessee is abandoned by the Confederates. Braxton Bragg is getting ready to fight the Federals at Chattanooga and Chickamauga, and he pulls almost all of the Confederate soldiers out of Knoxville from Jacksboro and Clinton's Bridge, guarding the railroads. There's a small group left at Cumberland Gap, and there's a small group that are over around Bristol, Elizabeth, and Carter's Depot in that area. William Holland Thomas is ordered to take his command, and his command is not all in the same place. They're split up, in these various railroad bridges, guarding things, guarding the railroad, guarding baggage, guarding the supply lines, wherever. So Thomas is ordered to take his command to Bristol, Tennessee, and join in with Jackson, his brigade commander. Part of Thomas's command does that. The infantry regiment under Love will be a part of the regular Confederate Army through much of 1864. They fight with Early in Early's Valley campaign. Thomas takes the Indian Battalion, his Cherokee, and he goes back to North Carolina. And there's a huge question in the historical record as to whether or not he actually had permission to do that. Thomas will say that he had permission, but there's not actually any record that says that. And so Thomas will move his men back to the Great Smoky Mountains, and his job is to guard mountain passes to prevent federal incursions. And there are a lot of federal incursions. They take place every 2 or 3 months. There are regular federal soldiers, usually cavalry, that are moving into the far part of western North Carolina, because Thomas just doesn't have enough men to guard those passes. His men are not getting paid. His men are deserting. Those deserters are taking their families and heading other places. So Thomas doesn't really have enough men. So you have Longstreet in East Tennessee in the winter of 63, 64. You have Thomas's men. Longstreet is in western North Carolina, or he's partially in western North Carolina, but he's in East Tennessee the winter of 63, 64. And several times, short version of the story, Longstreet comes up with the idea of offenses. And in one of those, in a couple of times, Longstreet wants and orders the soldiers in western North Carolina to join him in trying to fight the Federals in East Tennessee. A lot of times, Thomas does this more than once, but a lot of times Thomas kinds of blows off these superiors' orders. Now, in December of 63, Thomas does take his command into East Tennessee. There's a raid on Sevierville, and then according to what historians think, Thomas was going to spend the winter in Gatlinburg. I know a lot of y'all like to go to Gatlinburg. It's not very high on my list. But I wonder, Elizabeth just said this, I wonder if you can get an airbrush t-shirt in Gatlinburg that says Thomas's Legion was here. I don't know that.
Thomas's Legion went to Gatlinburg, and all I got was this rock.
That's right. So Thomas's men are more or less surprised by federal cavalry there in December of 63, and they kind of retreat back toward North Carolina. Brigadier General Robert B. Vance heads into East Tennessee, and Thomas is supposed to come to his support. But on January 14th, 1864, Robert B. Vance is captured, and his command is surprised and captured. A lot of that is Vance's fault, but Thomas didn't show up to support Vance. And the commander in the area now, big district picture, Joseph E. Johnston, can't get at Robert B. Vance because he's in prison, but he can get at Thomas, and Thomas is arrested. Trial is held in Asheville, North Carolina on February 23rd, 1864. Once again, we do not know the outcome, but Thomas regained or remained in command of his battalion. So as I already said, Thomas is there. He's trying to hold these mountain passes, but his Cherokee battalion is not being fed. The men are hungry. Thomas is trying to get food for them. John B. Palmer, who is now district commander after Vance, is trying to sends him 100 bushels of corn. Thomas is trying to get men from Georgia and from South Carolina, and he's just really struggling. He is struggling to maintain unit cohesion. And apparently one of the things that Thomas does to keep his, at least the battalion that he has with him, to strength, I mean, it never really was, is anytime Thomas comes across anybody that's of military age, he will draft them into his battalion. A lot of these men are deserters that he is drafting into his battalion. This will lead to Thomas's third court-martial. Commanding officer of the 6th North Carolina Cavalry charged Thomas on May 11, 1864, for, quote, knowingly entertaining and receiving from his command, the 6th Cav, over 20 deserters from that regiment. He was charged with both, Thomas was charged with both conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, and for conduct good for conduct prejudice to good order and military discipline. Thomas's trial this time is held in Goldsboro, North Carolina, a long way from Western North Carolina. It's over toward the coast. And it's October 24th, 1864, and Thomas is found guilty. Stringfield wrote in his short history about 1900 that Thomas was found guilty of all charges. There were 3 charges. There's some debate as to what happens next. We do know that Thomas gets on a train and goes to Richmond, Virginia, to Jefferson Davis's office. And the thought is that Davis reduced or dismissed the charges against Thomas. We could spend the rest of the evening talking about that, but we're not. So 3 times William Holland Thomas was tried. Last time he was actually found guilty. The other 2 times are not real clear in the surviving historical record. And when I say surviving historical record, one of the things the Confederates burned on the night of April 2nd, 1865 in Richmond are a lot of the court-martial records. There is one good book of court-martial. It's an index is what it is. And you can occasionally find details in various compiled service records. But most of those records are gone. So there's a lot of details we don't know. Thomas and Thomas's Legion in a lot of circles are like heroes. His legion was composed of both whites and Cherokees, leads the idea that we've been talking about, I've been talking about for a while, about diversity in the Confederate ranks. You know, we mentioned the Baker brothers, whose father was from Thailand, served in the 37th Battalion, Virginia Cavalry. I've mentioned other folks, free men of color who volunteered in Confederate service in the past. So here's one more little piece of that, of these Confederate soldiers who were not always white. But Thomas has a lot of problems. And it's not just us. It's not just me sitting here today talking about Thomas's Legion. Congressman A.T. Davis, who was a political rival to Thomas, wrote to the Secretary of War in 1862 that he asked that Thomas's command be disbanded. Davison believes that Thomas had, quote, greatly transcended his authority to the prejudice of the service. Thomas's Indians are worthless and never will do any good. March 1863, Colonel Benjamin S. Ewell, Assistant Adjutant General Joseph E. Johnston, believed that legions in general need to be disbanded, and particularly Thomas's Legion. Ewell will write that in their present condition, Thomas's Legion, are ineffective. Another North Carolinian will write to Governor Vance in 1864. Quote, it is true, W.H. Thomas is in Jackson County, but what does he do? No order ever reaches him, or if it does, he has his own, or if it does, his own way is the best. So William Holland Thomas was paroled in Waynesville on May 9th, 1865. He is forced to resign as chief of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee. He is later reluctantly sued by the lefty Cherokee. They are trying to gain possession of the property that Thomas has in his name. Thomas later in life suffers with mental issues, dies in a mental hospital in Morganton, North Carolina in 1893. Here's my question for you this evening. Is there any Confederate officer that was arrested more during the war than William Holland Thomas? Yes, if Stonewall Jackson would have lived long enough, he probably would have arrested everybody more than 3 times. Yes. So was any Confederate officer arrested and tried more often than William Holland Thomas? I don't have an answer to that question. Maybe one of you will have an answer to that question and know of somebody else like that. Thomas's Legion gets a lot of press. Interesting story. They are not the 69th North Carolina troops. The 69th North Carolina troops is also the 7th North Carolina Cavalry. Thomas's Legion never had a numerical designation. And before you go pull Stringfield's essay from Clark's book, Stringfield did write that 40 years after the war, but there's no documentation to prove that. In fact, as I said, we know the 69th Battalion or the 69th North Carolina Regiment is the 7th Cavalry. So that needs to be nipped in the bud. But that's my talk for this evening. What do you think? Have you ever heard of William Holland Thomas? What do you think? Of course, there are other Cherokee out there who do serve under General Stanwady. That's a David, you're right. Compiled service records all say Infantry Regiment or Love's Regiment or something else. They do not say the 69th Battalion or 69th Regiment. I don't know why I keep saying 69th Battalion. 69th North Carolina troops. There are a lot of other stories about Thomas's Legion out there that we probably can go into depth in the future, because I got 2 or 3 other posts I want to write that are connected with this. But Thomas men early in the war may have scalped some Federal soldiers. Thomas, at the very end of the war there in May of 1865, when the Federals are approaching, Thomas goes down. This is time of the Battle of Warm Springs. Thomas takes 20 of his Cherokee warriors and strips them, paints them probably in black because that's the color of war, and demands the Federals surrender, or he's going to go in and scalp all of them. And Thomas's commanding officer, Brigadier General James Martin, steps in and says, don't pay any attention to him, and surrenders. Bobby Joe Goodson, yes, Thomas was died in a mental institution after the war. There are a lot of avenues to explore, and as I said before, a huge chunk of Thomas's Legion is in the regular Confederate Army. Well, I say good evening to TJ and Ryan and Robert and Bobby Joe Goodson and whoever else I missed. Our friend Jason Boshears. Hope everybody's doing really well. It's a beautiful evening out there. It's raining here at my house. Thomas's Legion, one of those things that we need to dig deeper into. And I think it not only shows diversity within the Confederate ranks, as we've been talking about for the past few weeks, I've been talking about for a long time, but I think it's a story we need to tell and we need to get right. I had a lady I was talking to in Chapel Hill on Thursday night who has some type of website or something, and she says on there that Thomas's Legion never lost a battle, and that's just not true. At least the group that Thomas has with him back in the mountains, they seldom won a battle. So yeah, I hope all of y'all will continue to dig more into William Holland Thomas. Jason Boshears, I absolutely agree. The more I read, the less I realize I know. Um, and that's why we do this. That's why we read. That's why I've been writing blog posts. Somebody said the other day that I have been writing blog posts for 20 years. Is that true? Somebody do the math. My first post, yep. Is that true? My very first post I ever made on, wasn't even called Looking for the Confederate War at that time, is October 11th, 2006.
Yep.
So we're coming up on 20 years.
We need to have a party.
We need to have a party. Y'all want to come over to the house? I mean, I could easily put all of y'all in this room right here. It's a good size room. And yeah, everybody come over. We'll have a party. I got a couple extra bedrooms. I got 3 or 4 tents if you like sleeping under canvas. Josh says Bryson City is where they lost support during the Union raids. There were raids. I didn't realize that Murphy was captured so many times, or federal raids into Murphy, North Carolina, 3 or 4 times during the war. And I was working on a list, but I don't have it up right now. Bobby Joe Goodson says he was on social media. Dennis says my beard's looking good. That's good because parts of it just kind of fell out with all the stress of the past 3 or 4 months. Thomas was an interesting character. The whole war, like many other places, Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, really needs more digging into on a small scale. Had somebody was speaking a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I was at the Western North Carolina Civil War Roundtable. The program person was really going on about the blog, and he actually really got it, because a lot of times I'll take these little subjects, little just pieces of history, and try and really dig deep into those things. And but it's just little history, because little history matters. TJ wants to meet at the Vance birthplace. Sure, we can meet over there. They don't like to talk about Vance very much, but we can do that. And I hope everybody who wanted a copy of All Things Zeb Vance got a copy, because they're about sold out, and there will not be a reprint of that. I'm not sure if I have very many copies left. David Pope says, do you think there's a space for an updated book on Thomas's Legion? Not really right now. We've got the classic, which is Vernon Crow's book, Storm in the Mountains. There's a biography on William Holland Thomas, which I don't remember who wrote it, but it's here someplace. And then volume 16 of the North Carolina Troop Book series is probably a really in-depth look at Thomas's Legion. So with those 3 books, I think we're good for the next few years. I do. That's just me. I think there are a lot of other things. I just mentioned 3 books. I think there are a lot of things that have never been written about that we need to continue to tackle, instead of rehashing the same stuff on William Holland Thomas. And there are new things to discover always, but let's tackle some of these new subjects and get that information out there. David Pope, do you remember who wrote the biography? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. I don't know where it is. I had it here and I wandered off with it someplace. No, Elizabeth just asked if I wanted her to look. Jason, Jason Bushears, I think there's a ton of things to do all new research on, whether it's a place or, Southwest Virginia doesn't have a really good history of the war in that area. There are tons of places. There's no book on Raleigh in the war, no book on Asheville in the war. That's just stuff that I think about. A lot of other mid-sized towns during that time period do not have histories. There are tons of regiments. There are 425 Confederate generals, and probably only a quarter of those have biographies. And so I think there's plenty of new, fresh work to do. That's what I'm thinking. What is the name of the other Thomas? Did it come out before or after Storm in the Mountains? Is there a bibliography in Storm in the Mountains? Goldboro and Russell. Okay. So I just think there's a lot of stuff that we can do that needs to be done. All new research, all new things to uncover and to dig through and to explore. So that's what's going on here. If you got any more questions, thoughts, comments, let me know. I've still not messed with this camera, and I still see it glitching there a little bit. And one day I will have time to dig more into that. I don't know if it's blurry on your end or not, but it's blurry on my end. Is it blurry on your end, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I don't know. Thought I had fixed that, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. Once again, I will be in Yadkinville on Tuesday night and at Tusculum College over near Greenville, Tennessee on Saturday at Crockett Days. So if you're in East Tennessee, come on out and see us. Check out some local history. That's the important part. We'll hang out here another couple of minutes. If you got any other thoughts or questions, drop them in the box. If you're watching this later and want to pose a question or a comment, try and send it to me. There's a contact form on my website because I don't always rotate back to these once we get done. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up for this evening. And the full version of this discussion should be online tomorrow morning. Would the Cherokee Reserves have Legion's items still there? That's a great question, Josh. So, Cherokee reservations. At the Museum of the Cherokee in Cherokee, North Carolina, they have a small exhibit on Thomas's Legion. Has a flag. They actually contacted me several years ago. The flag was not there when I was at the museum, but gosh, I don't remember how long that's been. I've been several times, but the last time I was there, the flag was not in there. It's a Confederate flag. And they actually contacted me asking me if I had any reference, any information about the flag, because they don't have anything in their files about where the flag actually came from. So, and I don't have anything in my notes about that, but I have seen a picture from somebody who was there that the flag was back on display. But the exhibit seriously needs help. You'll go through the museum and there'll be tons of great stuff about Attakuakua and about European voyages and the American Revolution. And then you get to the 1860s and it's like a case. And there's not a lot of interpretation there. But the Cherokee are supposed to be building a new museum. And so will it have a better exhibit? I sure hope so. It's a story that needs to be told. Some of the men who deserted out of Thomas's Legion joined George W. Kirk and the 3rd North Carolina Mounted U.S. And, you know, that's a story that needs to be told. So maybe we will get a better exhibit in the new museum. Maybe we'll live long enough, all of us, to see that new museum over in Cherokee, North Carolina. TJ says, was I talking about East Tennessee? We just need to do more research and work about all of these areas, not just Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, but all of these areas. And we need to continue to tell these stories, because there are a lot of people out there that are interested in this aspect of our history. They're interested in all aspects of our history, whether it be Native peoples or the American Revolution or World War II. A lot of people out there interested. So any other questions? As Josh, as far as what the Western band of the Cherokee might have relating to Stan Wadey, I don't know that. I know who Stan Wadey was. I knew he was like the last Confederate general to surrender. I know there's a great flag, I think, that says Cherokee Braves. I think it's the First National. But I don't know that much about the day-by-day movements of the Western band of the Cherokee during the war. This is just not something I've had time to research yet. Any other thoughts or questions? We'll hang out another minute. We'll play the Jeopardy music. Not that I'm asking trivia questions this evening. I had somebody send me a note the other day. I was doing trivia. I don't know if it was just wartime or Confederate. I wanted to know if I had some questions that they could use. And I sent him some, and I sent me a note back going, but I don't even know the answer to any of these. I don't even remember the questions I sent him now. And I'm like, dude, I mean, we all know about Fort Sumter and Appomattox. Josh, go check out the museum. Of course, I always recommend people to go check out museums, but go check out the Museum of the Cherokee Indians in Cherokee, North Carolina. Great place. I've enjoyed the times that we've got to go visit there. All right, folks, that's going to more questions than answers in my mind. I don't know much of anything. Jason, I'm right there with you. The deeper I read, not just into the 1860s, but the deeper I read into American history. I was listening to a podcast. I'm way off topic this right now, but I was listening to a podcast as I was traveling around the other day about all these Italian socialists and anarchy here in the United States in like the 19-teens. I mean, they're blowing things up with devices and everything. So much to learn out there. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me for this evening. I hope y'all have a fantastic week. If you're out and about, come see me, join in on the conversation. I absolutely love when we're all talking and sharing and asking questions and learning. But keep reading, keep digging. Check out the blog in the next day or so, and I should have this up. Y'all have a fantastic evening, and thank you so much for joining me. God bless.